Good evening, everyone. It's now 7 o'clock, so we're going to start the meeting with Standards and Audit Committee. I'd like to remind everyone present that the meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the Council's website. So if anyone's got a mobile phone, they can turn it off and put it into silent, please. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. I haven't received any apologies so far. Okay. Item 2 minutes, which is on page 5 of the agenda. I move that the minutes of the Standards and Audit Committee held on the 25th of November 2021 be approved as a correct record. Anyone have any comments? No? Okay. That's agreed. Item 3, urgent items of business. I haven't agreed to any urgent items of business. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations?
Am I having my turn? On the news?
Is it covered anywhere else in the agenda?
Yeah, it's
what page is it on?
It's on page 5, section 21.
Is this your question to Council, to David? Yeah.
Yes.
I believe Phil was going to pick that up as part of his item.
All right.
That's okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Thank you. So there's no declarations of interest. Okay. Item 5 is the mid-year complaints and inquiries report, which page 11 of the agenda, and I think Lee is going to introduce the report for this one. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our mid-year complaints report for the period April to September 2021. It's the first report we've seen for a while that's actually reported an increase in complaint volumes. There are a couple of main reasons for that. Firstly, we saw a significant increase in complaints across waste management around missed bin collections as a result of the industrial action that took place April, May last year. And the second main reason is COVID has an impact on some of our service areas in terms of, so for example, we've had an increase in complaint numbers across housing repairs. So a number of our housing contractors, their staff were isolating, or there was a shortage of materials. So there was, we came across a number of delays in actually in responsive repair. So that's the primary reasons for the increase. The main detail of this report for corporate complaints is in Appendix 1. Appendix 1 identifies our top 10 complaint areas, and what that document shows is some high-level learning for each of those 10 areas. Appendix 2 is our dashboard for adult social care complaints. There's a separate statutory procedure for adult social care complaints. And Appendix 3 is our dashboard for children's social care complaints. Again, we have a separate statutory procedure for children's complaints, and that detail is included in Appendix 3. Appendix 4 is just a summary of that shows how the council we have to undertake a self-assessment every year to demonstrate how we comply with the Housing Ombudsman's complaints handling code. And Appendix 4 is a summary of how we actually comply with that code. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do members have any questions?
Thank you for the report. I just wanted to ask you to clarify something. On 2.6, learning lessons from complaints, you say the summary shows a high level of learning, but on those 10 you've got here, there's only one that training occurred and 2 where it was advice. Would that be considered a high level of learning?
If you look, so if you go, so Appendix 1 is, so what Appendix 1 details is those 10 areas that receive the most complaints. And then again, if you go down, so if you look from, if you look on page 25 onwards, for each of those 10 areas, we've tried to summarise some the key learning for those 10 areas. So for example, you'll see for housing repairs, let's just pick up the the third bullet point there. So again, that's alluding that maybe there were some delays in the progression of MEA's cases. So that's one example. Again, so for each of those 10 areas, those bullet points summarise, some key learning outcomes that have resulted in upheld complaints.
Can I follow that up then?
Of course.
Where you've reminded people of things, what's the sort of quality assurance of that? Is it conducted by?
Well, I don't, they're not my staff, they're not my services.
No.
So how the complaint system works is, so when we close a complaint and it's upheld, we must track the learning.
Yeah.
So the learning is tracked on our complaint system, and we log that as a complaints task, we track that, and then we make sure the service delivers that action. So there's a tracking of all agreed learning. So we will be going to servicemen and saying, have you reminded your staff about this particular complaint and the outcome from that?
Thank you.
Any other councillor questions? Councillor Minardi?
Yes, sir. I just want to find out, in the borough, in 6 months' time, the whole of 6 months, we've got 827 complaints, am I correct? I mean, taking into the population of the borough, 827 complaints. Is it, what's the rationale? Is it because we're doing very well, or is it because the residents are not really familiar with the procedure for complaining?
So your point is that there's not that many?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, lots of, our complaint numbers have come down over recent. This is the first report we're actually reporting an increase in complaints. So again, I think as a council, we do promote our complaints process. So I'm not, I don't think we're not actually, we're covering up complaints. We're going out of the way to promote the complaints procedure. So, for example, across adult social care, we've produced leaflets and posters that go out into care homes that make those residents clear as to what they need to do if they're unhappy with that service. So again, in children's services, in terms of, again, we've got leaflets. So every time there's a child assessment case or a child visit, again, the service are promoting the complaints process there. In terms of litigation cases, again, so we're doing all we can to promote complaints. Is it a low number? So it's the highest it's been for a while, but we've got a reason for that this period. And if you look at Appendix 1 on page 23, there's been a significant increase there across waste management complaints, and that in the main was because of the industrial action. So you see that this same period previous year, 62 complaints, this year 229. So that's a big factor as to why we've seen an increase in complaints for this report period.
Yeah, but it's still below your target.
We don't have a target.
I think that was a target.
We have a target for upheld complaints, lower the better, but we don't have a target for number of complaints.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Collins?
Thanks, Lee. Just want to put on page 26, Cleveland Green bit. The contact centre will be provided with staff and details of the tree team. And actually, any other complaint related to the contact centre team? If there are say complaints about getting parking permits or IT, will this be on this report?
If it's this Appendix 1, so it doesn't capture. So this is not the 827 complaints.
Yeah.
So this is our top 10 complaint areas. So yeah, we may well have received complaints about the contact centre, but they're not in the top 10. So they won't be analysed as part of this Appendix 1.
Okay.
Any other councillors, any questions? Councillor Snell?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it's worth pointing out that in terms of confidence not too far away from the complaint action. In fact, we've a lot exceeded in most instances. So I think that's worth pointing out that whilst almost certainly things are going to go wrong, it's nice to know that actually we're not getting quite a bit right as well. Otherwise, people would feel the need to make a compliment. One thing that does concern me a little bit is on page 25, and it's the housing repairs. Now, a few years back, you might recall that MEAs were under a lot of pressure because they were sort of not satisfactory in any way, shape or form. And yet, got a lot of pressure on them to up their game to get into a state where actually they were doing a good job. And it's these kinds of issues that are being reported now, where we're closing down last time. So my question is, what do we do? What do we do to monitor their performance? And is it regular? And does it make a difference?
I think again, I know across housing that they have robust contract management controls and procedures around monitoring our contractors' complaints. I think for me, back to the volume of complaints, if you look, if you look at the number of complaints we have for housing repairs, 84, and then you think about, well, how many repairs did we undertake as a council? And there's thousands. So it's, I think, put it into perspective, it's a low number of complaints based on the number of repairs that we've actually undertaken. But yes, there is definitely robust contract management in place with me and other contractors.
Any other?
Yeah, I also like to acknowledge the 0% in maladministration compared to last report we had. In the last report, there were a lot of issues to do with maladministration, but this time around, looking at page 13, housing and antisocial behaviour maladministration is 0. Says it's not applicable, so which means it seems to be there has been some work being done to reduce the maladministration, which is maybe human error. So I'd like to say congratulations for that. And also noted that there is no data compared to last report we saw that quantified each and every one. Say, for example, housing repair, finding of fault and service failure. What is the percentage? What is the number? I mean, that's nothing to quantify it.
Are you on page 13?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So that particular table, page 13, section 2.4 is a summary of all ombudsman's decisions in the reporting period, along with any compensation payments we've made out as a council that may not have even gone to the ombudsman. So I think my view on this would be, so for that 6-month period, we had 7 local government ombudsman or housing ombudsman findings. Of those 7,
yes,
there were 3 that found fault.
Yes.
So it's still 3 too many, but it's still 3 too many. But it's not. We haven't got a significant number of ombudsman findings of fault. Of those three, the council actually disputed 2 of those 3. So there's a housing case there. The ombudsman found fault in delays with regards to repairs, but on that particular case there was more to that particular complaint. The council view was that the particular tenant should have been decanted, but the tenant refused to be decanted for the works to be undertaken. So the council disputed the ombudsman's findings on that particular case. And the other 2 cases, again, where they found fault was the resources in place, the business delivery grant. So for that particular case, the council had set up an online application form to process our applications, because it felt as though if they did that, it would mitigate the risk of any fraudulent claims or fraudulent applications. But that wasn't in the scheme that was set up. So the ombudsman said we couldn't refuse to process a grant because we were insisting on someone completing an online application. But the council view was, well, we did that because we wanted to mitigate the risk of fraud.
Thank you.
Any questions? Anything? Going to recommendations. Which are on page 12. Right, and just to note the statistics and performance for the reporting period. Is that noted?
Noted.
Okay, thank you. Item 6 is on page 69 of the agenda, and that's the internal audit process report 2021-22, and I believe that is going to present that.
Thank you, Chair. So this report covers reports that have been issued as final since the last report in November, and also shows draft reports issued in work in progress. On page 73.3, we finalised further 3 reports on housing rents, children's social care commissioning and premises licensing. All of those received a green positive assurance opinion. In addition, during this time period at 3.4, we've implemented some new working papers software, which should go on, I'll say it should go online for the new plan year from April. It's actually going online between 5 and 9 tonight. The couple of issues that we have with the reports, that's all been ironed out now, so that's all good. 3.5, the work on the troubled families programme, that excuse me, that attracts income to the council. The work that it completes with the troubled families, so it is important to the council. So I've had to allocate that work now to one of my senior auditors, with the member of staff who left last September being the person that used to do that. I also had to verify some grant spending on the local authority bus subsidy grant, and that's basically just making sure it's spent as according to the terms and conditions of the grant, and that was fine. 3.6, an update on the resourcing. The adverts have gone out to recruit 2 vacancies for the internal auditor post. They closed on Monday. I shortlisted those over the last 2 days, and we've got interviews, 4 people being interviewed next Thursday and Friday for those 2 posts, so that's really good. 3.7, that just details changes to the plan resulting from requests from the service areas. Page 76, the table shows the reports issued as final at draft stage and the work in progress. And page 77, we show the work in service areas for which no reports are issued, so that's stuff like troubled families and that sort of thing, and changes to the plan. And then page 70 to 80 provides a breakdown on medium recommendations together with management comments and the time frame for their implementation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, very much appreciated. Just a quick question. Could you give us a definition of, I'm looking at page 76, got status, and it says file. Some got green, when it says opinion advisory. What is that? Can you just explain a little bit more what it means, please?
Yeah, no, advisory reports we can provide an assurance opinion on. They tend to be reports where the service area come to us potentially because they've identified an issue and they want us to go in and give them some sort of assurance around the controls and the risks and that sort of thing within that area. So it tends to be generated by the service. They know there's an issue already, whereas when we do our normal sort of audit plan work, we go in, we don't know what the state of it is until we start digging into it.
Do you want to come back?
Well, just following that up, I mean, when I've been doing audits as well in companies, we normally have to do a workflow. Are you actually looking at the workflows and comparing what's done, or do we have anything like that?
With the, particularly with the ISO work, that's definitely what that is. It's looking at workflows, looking at their practices, procedures, strategies, that sort of thing. With the other type of advisory work that we do, where we may have been called in to potentially look at issues with a member of staff, we'll focus more on the issues that have been identified to us.
Okay, so what are you doing then? You're looking at what the workflow should be and comparing against the action?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any councillors some questions?
Yeah,
Councillor Larkin?
yes, just me again. 3.6. In the last report, I think it was raised about the 2 vacancies. It's been taking a long time and taking into consideration the importance of internal audit. If these staffs are truly very important and have an impact on internal audit, why is it taking so long?
Well, initially it took so long because the council actually had a recruitment freeze, so we weren't able to recruit. But now we've put that before Sean and Jackie Houston, the head HR and OD. They've agreed that there is a need for those posts, and so we've been allowed to recruit to them. So it was purely the fact that there was a recruitment freeze.
If you really look at this report, there's a lot of reasons as a result of not having enough, not having the two key members of staff.
I agree.
It's something, if there's anything we can do, we just need to make sure.
I think moving forward, having the two additional staff is really going to help us.
Thank you.
So again, if I just go move on from that point, when do you, and you said you're interviewing next week, I guess, so when do you think that the post will be filled?
That will be dependent on the applicants because some of them might have to give notice. So we can't give a definitive date at this stage. Two of them are internal, so I would imagine that could be carried out quite quickly. With the two externals, I don't know until we actually interview them and find out what's going to notice them.
Okay, thank you. Any other outstanding questions?
Yeah, I've just got a question on page 79. There's an action there that is ongoing. I mean, what does that mean in practice? Does it mean that one is going to stay on year on year, or having read it, it seems that there's kind of no further actions that can be taken. But what effect does that have on the audit?
I haven't actually got. So by ongoing, so what they're saying there is with every service provider that they are contacting for spot purchasing, they will have to get the terms and conditions signed. So it was a one-off with that one, but we're saying moving forward you have to make sure that they're all signed off. So it's ongoing in that respect, that we wouldn't say you're only doing it for this year, you've got to do it.
Okay, so just do you mind if I come back on that?
No,
Sorry,
that's fine.
just in my experience of audits, it might be that you update a procedure to ensure that that's done and to follow, and then close the audit point. Would that happen? Or?
Yeah, that could well happen. It'll be picked up when we do our next audit in that area.
Yeah.
And
But
then,
you would leave it as a point
yes,
to open the
yes,
next audit.
yeah.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Mr. Clark, you've got a question?
Yes, referring to 5.3, your consultation with external auditors, the fact that you didn't have a full complement of staff and external audit being delayed, has there been any overlap between the work you're doing with external auditors?
No, the external auditors will a bit later. They have been concentrating on the accounts, so no, we would contact them early in the year and make sure that we can overlap.
Any other questions? No? Okay, we can move to the recommendation on page 69, which is Standing Audit Committee consider reports issued and the work being carried out by the internal audit in relation to the 2021-22 audit plan. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 7. It's the internal audit strategy 2020-21, and it does say annual, but it should be 6 months internal audit plan.
Yes,
2020.
apologies for that. Yeah, I missed that.
I'm making that, see? Right, that's Gary again, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So page 81, it was previously shown that due to the resource and the ongoing implications arising out of the pandemic, that we'll continue to have a 6-month plan. and that'll be a rolling audit plan during 2022-23. Page 82, 2.1 lists those who were liaising with developing the original strategy. It's worth pointing out that we're at the end of that strategy now in the final year, so that will be revisited probably around about September, October of this year, and we'll meet up with all those senior managers again and reprioritise the work and sort out the new 3-year strategy for the next 3 years. 2.2 lists the other sources that we accessed as part of our planning work. Just to point out 2.4, any changes to the plan are agreed by myself and or Sean and presented to the Standards and Audit Committee as part of the progress reporting arrangements. Page 83, 3.1. This 6-month plan has been developed based on current resources. I thought it was important to point that out because what we intended to do in the cast is base it on establishment, and with the recruitment freeze it means we were never going to achieve the plan. So this time what we've done is we've based the 6-month plan on the current resources, and then as we get the new resources on, we'll pull more audits in from the plan, and then they'll be reported to Standards and Audit Committee as usual. As we reported in the previous report, some work had to be deferred and requested service areas, and that's been carried forward into 22-23. Page 87, that defines the role of internal audit and the factors influencing our coverage have been greatly influenced by the pandemic, which also includes our relationship with Mazars, who weren't able to attend the site during that period. This should be resolved in 22-23. It also impacted on resources and how the council operated, so the pandemic had quite a big effect. Page 92.1, we're not aware of any relationships that affect our independence or objectivity. 2.2, we will continue to work closely with other assurance providers, including external audit. And then page 91, Appendix A, that table shows factors both internal and external that may affect the council. Some of those will be covered within our audit plan for this year. Others won't, particularly where they're emerging and where we see what happens. And then page 92 to 102 is the 3-year strategy, which was agreed back in 2021. On page 103 to 108, it details the audits to be undertaken during 22-23, with the first 6 months showing dates due to be carried out based on current resources. Take any questions?
Thank you. Do you have any questions on Councillor Collins?
Thank you. Looking at Appendix A, I hope I'm looking at that one. This is the external factors that may affect current council. Until it was done before the Russians invaded, because I would have thought Ukraine will impact on us now. We'll probably be taking in refugees.
Yes.
So that's another one we've got to add. Okay. And the other question, if I could ask another question, this is the Billman Road contract review. It says here, it's on page 97, there have been problems with this site which have resulted in delays in completing the work. This includes one of the contractors walking off site and putting in a compensation claim, and the fact that the council was not novated to TRL, so remained with the council. Could you expand a bit more on that, please? Because I'm not quite sure I understand what's going on here.
Not off the top of my head. No.
Yeah, I'll take it, Chair. So this is the relationship between the council and Thurrock Regeneration Limited. Sorry, I'm not sure how much all members, including co-opted members, are aware. Thurrock Regeneration Limited is a wholly owned company by the council. It has a regeneration focus or remit, but its main operation is house building in terms of being able to provide a mix of social housing and so on. And it was used for more difficult sites. There was a particular contract and development that was agreed for TRL, which was the Belmont Road site. It ran into a number of problems after a contract had been let, which made it difficult to continue with. At that stage, the contract was still with the council and hadn't been novated across to TRL. And so the compensation claim, when it didn't go ahead, rested with the council and not TRL. Off the back of that, quite a lot of review and went through General Services Committee, was made of the Thurrock Regeneration Limited governance. And with that, it was recognised that there were some difficulties with the company in that it was mainly made up or wholly made up its directors of local authority officers, and that created concerns around conflicts of interest and all of that type of aspect. You're working to two different governance regimes, if you like. Complete review, the directors all left the company at that stage, and more independent directors have now been put on and is moving forward on that realm. But that was the history towards this particular item.
Yeah. Any other questions from councillors?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we're looking at page 97 again, and we're looking at our body cultural services. This is rather a weird one, because you've got here, if the new asset management software is not fit for purpose, the council will not be able to monitor and maintain its species in accordance with the strategy, etc. That's down as a risk. Is it a risk? Because surely that would be tested way before you even purchased it, and is that just there for completeness' sake?
That's there just for assurance. It's just providing the service with assurance that the software is doing what it should do, and the council are doing what they should do, so they comply with the regulations they use.
Perhaps it's just a belt and braces thing.
Yes.
You can say that way. It looks like we're going to buy a piece of software that could potentially be rubbish because we haven't tried it, and then we go, oh dear, it's rubbish.
No,
That's not what that means.
No, that would be driven by the service, audit like that. They'll ask us to come and just do belts and braces check.
Just checking, thank you.
Any other questions, members?
I'll just ask this question again. Yes, I do understand that the COVID was a very big setback, not to businesses alone, but to the whole country and everyone. On page 87, 1.2, the pandemic has been a significant impact on how the council is operates. I was just wondering, how prepared are you, should we have another pandemic or any issue that requires staff to work from home? How prepared are you to tackle it?
Well, in terms of the IT and that, pandemic happened quickly, so IT had to put loads of systems in place very quickly, and they were put in place very successfully. So, from our point of view, most of my staff are still working home most of the time now. So, if there was another pandemic, I think we're in a good place.
Thank you.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to refer to page 105, the ISO 9001 Environmental Services. We've got here previous rationale for internal audit coverage. Previous auditor had to pull out of the contract, so internal team now provides a service which covers a number of areas of the environment. So we're checking our own homework. Is that right?
No, that's the ISO 9001 report that we brought to the last audit committee. So it covers waste, highways, there's cemeteries. It covers a load of areas within environmental services, and my team actually go down to the depot and they go through all their paperwork.
Okay, it says the previous auditor had to pull out of the contract.
Yeah, that was prior to us doing it. The council were employing external consultants to do all their audit work, and there was quite a significant cost to that.
Okay, so it's just on cost, not competence.
Yes, yeah. Well, he actually left. He left the country, went to Australia.
Okay.
So,
Get further away.
so
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions from anybody? Okay, if you can move to the recommendation on page 81, and it's that the Standards and Audit Committee receive and agree a 6-month internal audit plan for 2022-23.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah.
Chair, before the next item, can I make a suggestion? I've no idea whether Lee and Gary want to leave or not. I'm just conscious that their reports are finished. The next ones, being the next 2 items, are coming from the people on the laptop. So I'm wondering if our cooperative members wish to come down that side of the table so they can see and maybe speak what they're doing.
We'll be kicked out.
Sorry,
I know you were so intent there, wasn't you? Thank you very much for your report.
Thank you. I'll be back anyway.
You can stay.
Yeah, I'll stay.
Sorry, that's all right.
Yes, fine, thank you.
I sit over here in 3 places, nobody can see me.
Oh. Fall off the chair. Is that right, are we all ready to? Yep, ready to set, guys? Yeah, okay. Move on to item 8, which is the Countable Investigation quarterly update. And that can be found on page 109 of the agenda, and I believe it's David. No, sorry, it's Phil. Phil Buck is online. Sorry, hi Phil. Hiya.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. So yeah, I'm going to present the quarterly update for the Counter Fraud and Investigation. The service is responsible for the prevention and detection of and deterrence of all instances of alleged economic crime affecting the authority, including allegations of fraud, theft, corruption, bribery and money laundering. This report outlines the performance of the Counter Fraud Investigation team over the last quarter, the Thurrock Council and the work we've delivered nationally for other public bodies. So if I move to our performance figures for Q3, we received 66 reports of suspected fraud in Q3, and you'll see that that's broken down into the crime types. Now, a question that was raised at the last meeting was of the reports that we received, how many of those relate to internal allegations? And you can see on the right-hand side, they're given the title of worker or insider threat. So of the 40 reports received in of the 66 reports received in Q3, 3 of those were internal allegations. For example, this could be an allegation of misuse of a corporate card. It could be an allegation of a member of staff who's on perhaps long-term sick, but it's found to be working elsewhere, or someone who's come into the organisation using a fraudulent CV. These are all different examples, and obviously there's many various types of insider threat and worker fraud. So that's just some examples of that. So during this quarter, 38 investigations have been closed, and you can see the breakdown of those underneath. 2 sanctions have been delivered. The value of the detected fraud is £579,095.62. 1 social housing property has been recovered, and there's a further 91 investigations currently being carried out by our criminal finance investigation team who work alongside us. So moving down, you'll see the breakdown of the totality of investigations that are currently being conducted, and again they're broken down into different crime areas.
We've lost Sam. We can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me? I can hear you.
Muted himself.
No, he's not. Have you not muted yourself? Have you at all?
No.
Could I ask you to leave the meeting and come back in,
Sure.
please?
Can you hear me, Jenny?
Hi, how's that?
I think I don't know. I think the laptop just muted itself.
Right. That's perfect, Phil. Sorry, could you go back a few steps, please? Sorry.
Yeah.
Where did you get me to?
Just explain 66.
Just 66?
You just explained basically 66.
Oh, the basis of the 66.
Okay, right. So, yeah, so there were 66 reports received in Q3. You'll see the breakdown of the crime types that are there, and the question that was asked from the previous meeting, and how do we differentiate between those that are brought outside of employees of Thurrock Council, and you'll see on the right-hand side that they're identified as worker or insider threat. So there'll be cases that could be anything from a member of staff who's on long-term sick is found to be working elsewhere, somebody misusing a corporate credit card, applying for a post using a fraudulent CV. There's numerous examples of what that can look like. You'll see that in this quarter as well, we've closed 38 investigations, and you'll see the breakdown of those crime types there. 2 sanctions have been delivered during that quarter. Now that can be a referral to HR, dismissal, or it could be that they've been dismissed, or they could have been taken through to court. I haven't got a breakdown of what those are for those ones, but the value of detected fraud for the quarter is £579,095.62. 1 social housing property is recovered, and we've got an additional 91 investigations that are currently being conducted by the Criminal Finance Investigation Team. You'll see the totality of the investigations that we're currently looking at, because they do roll on, because these investigations aren't dealt with necessarily in 3 months, because of COVID. Getting a case to court now is a very long drawn out process, sadly, because of the backlog. So we currently have 91 investigations that are being conducted by the, you'll see the breakdown underneath there of the number of investigations in the totality being investigated by the team. So moving down there, I can talk about the work plan for 21 and 22. Now, this is the proactive work plan, so there's different areas that we're looking at. The first one is the training in high risk areas of the council for counter fraud measures, and that is work that I've been coordinating, delivering training to various departments, including housing. Mike Deneen is responsible for reviewing all relevant policies concerning fraud aspects, which is an ongoing review. Now, with the COVID business grants counter fraud programme that we've been working alongside the business grant department here, where we've been doing lots of checks, pre-assessment checks on applications that come in as a way of preventing fraud, not just reacting to the detection of it, using data matching exercises with Spotlight and the National Fraud Initiative. Moving down there, you'll see that there's a renewed education and marketing campaign for countering fraud. So this is things that we put out in the media, and you'll see that is still being tweaked, and there'll be things that will be displayed online and in-house in civic offices, and also publicly around some of our council housing premises. And lastly, we'll see that there's the targeting of the Proceeds of Crime Act and using civil legislation to maximise the effect on criminal behaviour. So where we have an offence of a fraud that we've been investigating, for example, as well as dealing with that and trying to bring the suspects to justice for that, it's about looking at repatriating the money that they've taken using the Proceeds of Crime Act legislation. And yeah, and that is our work plan for this year. Has anybody got any questions?
Thank you. Any questions, Councillor Carter?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your report. I particularly welcome the proactive work plan, which looks very good. Just on page 115 with the proactive work plan, we've got training of high-risk areas to use accountable measures. It goes on from 6/21 to 05/22. Is this because it's a particularly long course, or it's just going to be multiple people trained over a long time?
This is ongoing because, as you'll know, there's, in departments, staff come and go. So it's important to keep the training going. Legislation changes, and particularly over COVID and in the pandemic, particularly with housing, obviously, the government stated that we couldn't prosecute, or we couldn't remove people from council properties. There was an embargo on that, so things change all the time. Legislation changes, so the reason it's that time period is to adapt with the changing environment and legislation, but also to ensure that we've got the continuity of training with new staff that come and work for the new departments.
Councillor Collins, if you like.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, please. Hello, Bill. Councillor Collins here. I'm David Kleinberg from Public Sector. I'm the department's greatest fan. I think you're doing a fantastic job. And
thank you. I'll pass that on.
Okay, well, that's to everybody, not just Dave.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've got a couple of things I just want to make clear in my head. On page 110, it says halfway down, 38 investigations have been closed this quarter. 2 sanctions have been delivered in cases of proven fraud. What do you mean by sanctions, please?
Yeah, so a sanction can be that we're taking someone to court criminally, or a sanction can be it's a case where we've then referred to HR, and they've conducted a parallel investigation into a member of staff who is then dismissed. So that can be a sanction as well. A sanction could be a property recovered. It could be many different types. There's some examples of those. Unfortunately, I can't detail. I haven't got the details of those 2 sanctions, but yeah, it could be any number of things really, where we've repatriated funds, stopped fraudulent right to buy application, which then generates a fraud investigation. So it could be a number of different things. Sorry, I think you're on mute, I think.
Hello?
Thank you.
Anybody there?
Hello? Yeah, sorry, you were on mute, so I didn't hear the last couple of minutes. I apologise. You've gone back onto mute again. Unfortunately, I can't hear you because you're on mute again.
My apologies. Right. Yeah, we'll be able to.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Sorry about that. Yeah, you went on to mute.
That's right, Bill. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, thanks. Right, thanks. You've given us 91 investigations being conducted at the moment. Are these just Thurrock bound based, or I know we do work, or you do work outside of Thurrock, which we don't like to talk about. Are these the total cases, or do you have other cases on top?
I would have to come back and check on that. I wouldn't want to be misleading, so I'll take that away and come back to confirm that number for you.
Okay, and I just want to ask, what does it take to trigger a fraud investigation in your department?
Well, we have different methods in which we receive allegations. So it could be for the whistleblowing scheme. It could be through another law enforcement agency, the police, for example, where they have dealt with an incident at premises and then report to us that they believe there's subletting going on. It could be from another council. It could be from a member of the public. Obviously, there's the report fraud portal where people will make allegations, which is then taken into our intel department. They're assessed, triaged, and then, if appropriate, taken through to investigation. So there's a number of different ways in which a fraud investigation is triggered.
Right, thank you. I won't ask any more questions, Phil. I'm too afraid to. Thanks for your very brief.
Any other councillors got any questions?
Yes. Yes, hi Dean. First of all, thank you for providing us with the information on the internal figure on the fraud. My question is on page 110. Looking at the tables, housing fraud tops all the tables, with the first one 40, the second one is 28, and then the third one is 54. I just want to know, do you know why housing fraud is so high? What are you doing differently to reduce the fraudulent activity in the housing section?
I think probably the reason for obviously the housing is a big part of the council and the service it provides to the public. So there can be, you have to bear in mind that because a report comes in, it doesn't necessarily found to be fraud. Obviously, it could be closed. It could be a neighbour who suspects their neighbour is subletting, for example. The report comes into us, we investigate it. It's found not to be the case. I think over the last couple of years, we've been quite proactive with the housing department in the comms that we give out, and putting posters up in some of our premises to say, you know, if you think there's a fraud, report it. We work very closely with the housing officers, and so we give them regular training. We work alongside them, carrying out visits to properties, and so we get a number of fraud referrals from them in relation to housing. So yeah, it's a high number. I just think that's the makeup maybe of the in terms of the different types of departments that we have, and the obviously housing benefits not dealt with by us, so we wouldn't get their reports. They go to DWP. So in terms of what we're doing in relation to preventing it, it's around the work that we're doing with we put out comms publicly. We work alongside housing. We carry out housing audits where we knock on the doors, speak to the residents, check that the right people are in the right premises. It's been quite in the last 6 months, I suppose it's picking up now, because as I said previously, because of COVID and the pandemic, the way that the housing officers worked and we worked, we weren't able to do the visits to the properties, so that all stopped for a period of time until we came out of the lockdowns, and so these figures have obviously increased over time. But yeah, it's getting the message out there in comms, and it's also ensuring that when we do have an allegation, we investigate it thoroughly, and then again, if someone is dealt with by us, properties are recovered, then of course that is a deterrent for other people to stop them doing that.
Okay, thank you very much. Well understood.
Any other questions?
Bill, can you please clarify on page 110? You've got value of detected fraud is 579,000. I can see there are 66 suspected fraud cases in the quarter, which roughly is about 3 million together, and you've closed 38 in this quarter. The detected fraud, was that part of the 66, or was that ones that were ongoing?
That would include ones that are ongoing. I haven't got the breakdown of what that value refers to, but that would be ones that are ongoing. As I've said, some cases can take a year or more to get to court. So obviously the 66 were reports received in Q3, but we would have already had a number of investigations prior to that, of which some of this detective fraud that could have contributed to that figure.
So does that form part of the 91 on the table below?
So 91 is currently what we're still investigating. So some of those cases where we've recovered and the 579,000 is part of that, they could be cases that have been closed. So not necessarily of the 91 that's currently being worked on. It's a value that's across obviously some of the current and some of the previous quarters reporting. So it's across the board really.
Yeah, I do have, thank you, a more general question, if I may. Thinking more about the serious organised crime and the council's anti-money laundering policies, are there any additional risks given the current situation with Russia that present themselves to local authorities, and have you had to kind of adjust your work plan in response to that?
Yeah, I think the risk in terms of the current issues with Russia are probably more cyber related, and the likelihood of potential increase in attempted mandate fraud, and where they can access our systems. Fortunately, we haven't had any of those for a long time, but that's a very real possibility. So we got a cyber team who work behind the scenes on assisting the council with making sure that we're as watertight as we can be with our systems. So yeah, we're ever changing, and we work alongside other law enforcement agencies, and where we see someone else has been attacked in a certain way, we can ensure that we make sure we're not vulnerable, and we can have a look at what's happening in other areas to ensure that we close off any opportunities that may come from elsewhere. But yes, I think it's a very real threat in terms of from Russia, particularly around cyber. And yeah, I'm not an expert, but fortunately we have people in our team who are who can certainly help safeguard against that.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay. We can turn to the recommendation on page 109, which is the Standards and Audit Committee note the performance of the County Fraud and Investigation Service. Thank you. Move on to item 9, which is on page 117, and it is the audit process report for year ends ending on 31st of March 2021. Yeah? Okay. Jonathan, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Chair, and thanks to all members. Hopefully you can hear me and I don't have the issues Phil had. I'm just going to do a brief introduction because Rachel's here to talk to you directly. So this is as it says in the title, is the progress report so far. So the field work's largely complete. We were obviously hoping to be coming to this committee to sign off. We've had one specific resourcing issue on the audit team with the person who reports into Rachel, unfortunately, has gone on a sickness absence, and that has delayed the review process at a critical point, where it obviously then prevented us coming with a fuller position to the committee. However, I think it is worth putting in context of the national position, because we're receiving communications from central government at the moment to highlight the wider delays and the wider resourcing issues across all audits. And I guess one of the issues perhaps Rachel will probably allude to is the difficulty with replacing someone like Matthew on the team that we had at short notice, and with the resource stretched on a range of other priorities and audits across the board. So as it stands at the Essex meeting I attended last week, I don't think there was any other local authority audit in Essex yet complete. There may be a police and fire audit complete, but not a local authority. And broadly, everyone's working to pretty similar timescales, which is looking to sign off for those that have been prioritised in the first place over the next 3 months or so. So we're obviously continuing to support and work with Rachel, but we're waiting for obviously a solution to the resourcing issue as well. And it's also worth noting that the wider national issues have now led to some action being proposed by SIPFA, who are the people who put our code of audit practice together. And they are looking to relax some of the requirements for the forthcoming financial statements to enable the audit process to be quicker in the subsequent year for 21-2. So there's a range of actions being taken. It sort of kind of comes back to some degree to the COVID period. It's also linking into the level of quality standards auditors are facing now. But I'll let Rachel update you a bit further from her perspective, and then we can take questions subsequently. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think Jonathan's done a really good introduction there and covered most of the things I was going to say. So yeah, firstly, apologies that we are not presenting our completion report to this committee. That was our intention. However, due to the unexpected absence, we haven't been able to get to that position. As Jonathan said, there's a number of factors that we now need to consider. Not only that there is an issue with being able to replace that individual quickly, it's also a balance between the efficiency point as well, understanding how long that absence might last for and whether it would be more efficient to wait and have the same team back and that continuity, or to find a replacement, which may lead to some inefficiencies. But that is something that I'm exploring with my team, and I will keep talking to Jonathan about what the best way forward for the council is. We have made some really good progress in a number of areas. So, you know, we are not a long way away from where we need to be, but it is just that crucial kind of review period. I guess my caveat to that would be, given we are all remote working and our junior staff are remote working, we are probably seeing higher levels of review queries coming out of our work as a result of that. Because, you know, try as hard as you like, being in a remote situation, you can never coach and train someone as well as if you're sitting next to them, and that has really played out this year. Again, as Jonathan said, you know, I know it's not comforting for you as an individual organisation, but you're not out of line with the wider picture. There are some you know, really big things going on in the audit sector that are being considered, and you know, this is almost like a perfect storm. It's been building up for a couple of years where delays were happening and becoming kind of more the norm, and then layering COVID on top of that, and you know, absences as well. Then it's just got to that point where we're kind of at that critical point where it is causing delays now. As I said, I'll work with Jonathan and we'll come up with an agreeable timeline that we can look to deliver the audit, and obviously happy to take any further questions.
Thank you. Before I just want to make one comment. Was previous meeting we were told that there'd been an objection to the accounts, and that was going to make the audit longer because of looking into the objection. But it's not mentioned in this report. Is there a reason why that objection hasn't been mentioned?
No, I think it just goes hand in hand. So the objection is kind of linked intrinsically to some of the audit work we have to do. So once the audit work is complete and reviewed, we can then look to finalise the objection and go through that review process as well. So they are going hand in hand. I won't be able to do one without the other. Did you catch that? Sorry.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Collins.
Oh, no, thank you. Yeah, you actually touched on it on 3.3. External audit teams are grappling with issues of working remotely for some members. Are you going to be changing your business practices and sort of working in the office at some stage, or a central place?
Yes, so now that the restrictions are lifted, we are starting to change the way that we are working. Obviously, you know, being mindful of you know, people's personal circumstances. So we now have a weekly day that we go to the office together, and that's, you know, a step forward. We are more than happy to come out to the council and do work there, but obviously understand that the council have changed the way they work as well. I think seeing through this period, we will probably continue on that vein. Next year, I would really like to get back to the position where we're more hybrid working, where we do, you know, a couple of days probably in the office with the finance team, and a couple of days as us as a team, audit team, in our office to get a better balance.
In my mind, probably you need more than 1 day a week working together here. If you're that far behind. Hello?
Yes, no, 1 day, we're just started off with 1 day a week. Obviously the restrictions have only recently lifted. So that is where our starting point is. And obviously as the team, there is some absence within the team. I don't have anyone to meet with currently, but once we kick off again, we will make sure that we've got a working pattern that is the most efficient.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yeah. 2.1. It sounds to me, I mean, it did say here, while good progress has been made in most areas of the audit, this work remains subject to the detailed review progress with unexpected absence of work member of staff. It sounds to me that this member of staff you seems to be the reason why the report has been delayed. I mean, you have other people. Why didn't we have a backup? Why didn't we have a alternative?
So yeah, that's correct. The way we organise our teams is kind of a hierarchy structure. So you have more people doing the work, and the review processes are done in a hierarchy until it gets to me, and I do the final reviews. Generally, you have an engagement team that work on engagement. They get to know the client, they get to know the team. We don't have teams that kind of mix in terms of doing different work. And obviously, as a business model, we allocate the resources out to the audit. So we don't have people available to step in at short notice. We do have to do a big exercise of reallocation and working out what takes priority and what that means in terms of pulling people off different jobs. Obviously we can go out to recruit, but as it says in the report, the public sector external audit market is really struggling at the moment. We don't have you know, a big pool of people that we can draw on, so it's really hard to get that short notice cover in.
It sounds to me that you really need to review your way of practice, because if a member of staff is not there, obviously there should be someone to step into his place to ensure that the whole business keeps functioning. One member of staff should not paralyze the whole of the audit department. It's not a good practice.
Yes, and I appreciate that. The issue is we don't know how long that person was going to be off for. So initially I didn't think it would be this long. So there is little efficiency in bringing someone completely new in. If that person was going to come back. Now we're in a bit of a different position, and I'm going to start, you know, making sure that there is a plan B in place.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, councillors? Councillors now?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for your report. On page 129, we have a letter from the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities, where it says that the deadline's been extended to 30th of November 2022. Are you confident that you'll be able to hit that deadline and the subsequent deadlines over the next few years of the 30th of September?
At this stage, I can't say with any confidence that we will be able to meet that deadline or not. We are, you know, we're focusing on getting this year done, and then we'll need to look at the resource petition that we have and the amount of work that we have to do in that period, and the resources that we can get in to try and ease some of that backlog of work. Obviously, I will do everything we can to make that deadline, but I'm not in the position where I can say that, you know, sit here and say that we will meet it.
Yeah, that's not particularly encouraging. And I do have to agree somewhat with Councillor Archie that the minute you start compartmentalising work and you have staff vacancies, that you end up with logjams like you've got now. And I think he's right. I think you do need to find a different way, a more modern way of working, because that seems extremely old-fashioned. And it certainly sounds like it isn't flexible. And if one absence can knock you back that far, then obviously there's a problem there, and that needs to be solved quickly. So I think something needs to be looked at quite seriously.
Yes, I'll take your point on board.
Thank you.
Any other questions from councillors? Mr. Clark?
I think my asking a question was just knowing where there's a possible completion date for the 2021 audit.
As I said, I will look to come up with a plan and discuss it with Jonathan. At this stage, I can't tell you a date. I need to identify a resource to be able to come in, and then, you know, work through the file and make sure that we've got everything that we need. So once I've done that, I will discuss with Jonathan, and we will come up with you know, a mutually agreeable date.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to say that I am sort of disappointed, really, that we're in the situation we're in. Concerned in case they don't know what government will do. We've got no end date in sight for this audit and consequent next year's. What does that say for the finance, for the stability, the kind of robustness of the council's finances, and also if the government are going to change audit in future? What does that do to the robustness of our finances as an authority?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to add to that. So we did meet the deadline last year. We were one of the few to meet the deadline last year. We've obviously had quite an unfortunate position with one member of staff this year, which, as members have noted, it obviously feels much worse. Because that person has got so much knowledge by that point in the audit, that when you lose them at that critical point, it's really difficult, as Rachel's alluded to sort of replace that. If you think about someone coming in to sort of sign off that work at that point of an equivalent grade, they have then got to familiarise themselves with, you know, the entire process and audit that's happened up to that point to get themselves in a position where they're happy to sign things off. So we have had an unfortunate incident in that scenario. I share members' concerns, and I don't think they've set a reasonable deadline for next year. I think they should have moved it back further, because at the end of December this year, it was something like 30% of audits nationally had been signed off. So it immediately says to you a November date for next year is going to be very difficult. So although they've moved it back, in my opinion, they never should have moved it forward. And they certainly should have looked to move it back to at least, I'd say, the end of December, if not beyond that, just to give everybody a chance to catch up, come to terms with moving back to the ways of working pre-pandemic to some extent, and get the benefits. There are some benefits actually of working remotely in terms of how we interact and deal with queries, and there's benefits from working in the office that Rachel's alluded to. So we really need to maximise both of those and get the audit working more effectively there. However, the wider resourcing issue is what really concerns me, and still the level of work on valuations particularly, which is where SIPFA have targeted their attempts to try and simplify the valuation process on assets. But that's going through a consultation, an emergency consultation actually at the moment. We will find out shortly whether those requirements are relaxed. That would make a big difference to next year's audit if that was the case. So there are some sort of glimmers of hope in this, but the big one is really around the resourcing still. And we'll see where we are, you know, as Rachel comes to terms with that and shares her plan in due course. I think it's just really critical to keep you all updated throughout this process as things change. And it may be we need to do that outside of the committee as well as inside the committee, so members have got the fullest information possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are we ready to look at the recommendation, which is to note the progress of the external auditors in the audit for 2020-21 financial statements? Move on to item 10, which is ethical standards. Now, I know Matthew is going to introduce this, but before we do, for members who've had pink copies of evidence at the back of your pack, that is confidential. I know the head services are quite happy to, when we can't just throw those away, they need to be shredded. And they are happy for you to leave those with them and they will dispose of them. And because they're confidential, we cannot talk about those in open session. They're there as guidance for members, I understand, and I'm sure Matthew will pick me up on this if I'm wrong. But, so we cannot mention anyone's name that appears in that because it's not to be in the public domain. And if that is mentioned, we would have to go into whatever the technical term is, not being in the public domain. There's a term.
Exempt.
Exempt session, which I don't really want to do. So is everyone okay with that? Yeah? Okay, if I hand over to Matthew and he will give us a reading to this item.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Before I start, I just want to introduce you to Mark Bowen, who's the interim place to remain and name to replace. This report, item 10, sets out a request to refresh the Code of Conduct, to bring it up to date with modern expectations, and to also bring it into line with the LGA Model Code of Conduct. Some of the aspects we're asking you to consider tonight are introducing a social media protocol, potentially refreshing the officer member protocol, and also maybe looking at a member protocol. This committee has not received a general ethical standards or a standards report for some time, and on my understanding, the Code of Conduct hasn't been updated since 2013. So this report tonight seeks the committee's support to revisit the code and update it. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, please. Well, I'm not asking specifically about what's been written on the page. And I ask if there's the sort of matters that were alluded to. Are there any more, or are these all the matters of concern?
The monitoring officer receives obviously numerous complaints about members, and not just a particular member, but all sorts of members. Examples that come up include varied issues. I can't talk about particular cases regarding.
Are these all, or are there others as well?
I believe at present they are all.
Been reported.
Yes.
And also note the contents is actually to be taken as set in Appendix 3. Not actually clear to me exactly which way we are going with this.
So, Appendix 3 sets out the context for the recommendations within the report. Some of the items in Appendix 3 are still live issues, ongoing issues, and the monitoring officer and legal colleagues are still progressing with the affected parties some of those concerns.
ask a follow-up?
Yes.
I'm just trying to get to the bottom of what the bottom line is on this. There was a comment on here, I'm afraid I didn't mark it, that you can no longer sack or discard a councillor, no matter how they behave. You might turf them out of meetings for a while, but what are you looking to increase the sanctions?
Yeah, that's a good question, Catherine. I understand what you're getting at there. So the way the system works, very generally, is that there is a code of conduct that governs how we expect members to behave. If a member breaches that code, or we have an issue where a member is brought into question about that code, the role of the monitoring officer is to seek to resolve that issue with the member and the affected parties, the complainant, for example, so that both parties come out of the situation satisfied with the outcome. There are two forms of complaint. There's a formal complaint and what I term issues. So people come to the monitoring officer and raise issues, which we term, for want of a better word, informal. So we seek to resolve those informally. A formal complaint is when somebody, a complainant, fills in an actual formal request in review of the complaint, which my legal colleagues undertake. In terms of sanctions, legally there aren't any sanctions. I think ultimately you are elected by the people in the community. You're not staff. You know, we as staff would have sanctions if we broke rules. As members, you don't have the same sanctions. This committee is the forum in which, if we had any concerns about a member seriously breaching the code, or we'd undertaken a formal investigation, it would come before this committee to consider that. But in terms of sanctions, there aren't any hard and fast rules about what we can do. What this report aims to do is refresh the code to essentially help us as officers and help you as members understand better the parameters in which we can work to improve behaviour and work the best way we can.
Yes. Can I ask another one, or anyone else want to go? Okay. I don't want to hold it. You talked about social media protocol, which we've never had before.
Yeah.
Can you just sort of give us an outline of what are the points you want to cover, please?
Yeah, I think it's a good question again. I think certainly I've only been an interim monitoring officer for about 3 months. I think the thing that struck me most is the role of social media, and if I may say, I think members come under a lot of pressure and I wouldn't say abuse, but I think residents speak their mind on things like Facebook, and that's certainly been something that's eye-opening to me. I think what we have in Thurrock is slightly outdated. We don't have any protocol or guidance for members or officers about how we can protect you and how you might act and present themselves on social media. In terms of the detail of the protocol, I can't really go into too much detail about that. My legal colleagues are looking into that. But I think roughly, I would want the protocol to set out expectations of how we can protect members and how we expect members to be treated on social media, but also expectations about how we might conduct ourselves on social media. And that would be linked to the code of conduct so that we could advise members who may have a complaint against them about how they would better conduct themselves and how to resolve certain issues. I think to add on top of that, we are looking at trainings. I think that's really important. Certainly some of the conversations I've had with members more generally about these issues are you can get baited into replying. You know, if you're frustrated or they get a certain moment, I think it's quite difficult, and sometimes I think members have responded and that's brought into question their conduct. So I'm hoping to bring in some training in the new municipal year to maybe help members understand how they could navigate social media better, especially if they come under pressure from residents about certain things.
So yeah, I welcome this. Of course, we're not talking about what's in their brochure. There are individuals who have repeated by breaches of conduct, and we do need to refresh at the end of the day. You said 2013. It needs to be done in the social media policy, is certainly something overall. So that, no question, sorry.
Councillor Snell?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think a refresh is definitely due, Matt. It's, without mentioning names or anything else like that, we all, when we get elected, we're all made well aware of the, the ethical standards we're supposed to follow and the code of conduct. We're made very well aware of that. And yeah, for sure, there have been instances where some members might occasionally sort of breach those, sometimes on purpose, sometimes erroneously, as you're saying, dealing with members of the public perhaps. I think when we're talking about when it's other members that are egregiously breaking the rules, I think that there does need to be a forum where we can discuss that openly. And the point you made earlier is quite right. We're getting elected by the electorate of Thurrock. Now, they also need to know that their elected officials are behaving in a manner that is becoming an elected official of Thurrock. Occasionally, that is not the case. And I think there ought to be a forum and a sanction. If that's missing council meetings, if that means that it needs to be going to a vote before council or even this committee, then that absolutely should happen. And I think the further point regarding social media, we all know members of the public are very good at writing us members up. They do it quite often, and sometimes you're right, it's difficult. But I think, again, sometimes, and I've had this in the past, it's other members that are being outrageous on personal social media accounts. And in the past, it's been, well, we can't do anything about that because, and I think that needs to be tightened up because it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's we're talking about members that are breaking the rules on purpose and using in defence for where it's my personal account. And that should not be the case because at the end of the day, whether you're using a personal account or an official account, it's still an elected member. So I think we absolutely need to toughen up on everything because the way it stands at the moment, and particularly with the instances we had in this report, it cannot be right that individuals can persistently break the rules. And there is no comeback at all, it seems.
Chair, if I may, I think there's some good points made there. I think one thing I might suggest to this committee is this is the committee, this is the forum in which you can consider member behaviour generally. You can be the beacon to your colleagues in the chamber about how you expect them to behave to each other, to residents in the roadway. And I think the monitoring officer has the ability to bring a genuine complaints report, like Lee brings a complaints report about residents into the council. I can also bring a report about all the member complaints and update report on an annual basis. So if that's something this committee wishes to do, I would like to bring that report. We can bring that public way, or an exempt way we can discuss that outside the meeting. But we can bring a report and you can see over the past year what complaints have been thought about members, and you can set recommendations about your expectations as members about how you should be behaving. I think that provides us as officers some weight to act on your behalf because we can't sit in judgment of you as members. Only the strictly legal sense can do that, and as we pointed out in previous questions and answers, that's a very fluid area. So if you support us in how you want to behave, we can act with your authority.
Yeah, that's helpful. And moving on to the LGA recommendations there, I think that's also probably the best way forward because if we adopt them as well, I know not every council's got them yet, but a lot starting to, then I guess that would mean that as instances arise through other authorities and legal precedents are set potentially, then we can learn and benefit from those, the same as they can learn from us. But I still come back to the fact that for egregious breaches of the thing, there needs to be some kind of sanction. And I know it can't be huge, but there must be a sanction. If that's missing time, missing being banned from a meeting or two or whatever, something has to be levied against individuals. I'm not talking about your one or two that can result privately if you like. But when it's egregious, I think these are, like we've been saying, then there needs to be a further sanction.
Thank you, Chair. I think, yeah, I'll take that away, discuss with my legal colleagues and see within our, our local choices, Thurrock Council, if there's anything we can say, and I'll certainly update
you. Just on the social media policy, reference made to members having a single account, both private and council activities are undertaken. Is there a long-term plan on doing something other than training them to use the one account for both purposes?
I think what you're asking is would we set up an official account for a council perhaps for them to use within the realms of the council? It's a really good question. Mark might have an input. I imagine, and I can clarify this outside the meeting, that it's up to individual members how they wish to present themselves on social media. I don't think we necessarily have control over councillors as to how they act and how they wish to present themselves to residents. We obviously have certain legal restrictions just in general law about how people should conduct themselves, but I don't think we could necessarily do that. So I think members have a choice to represent themselves as Councillor X for this ward, but also themselves as a person, a private individual. And I think if a complaint came in, my lawyer colleague would look at the case law, as Councillor Snell was referring to, and the legal cases and history to look at whether a code would be in breach.
Councillor Baker,
I was just going to say, if you were to draw up, or if we were to draw up a code of conduct for social media, I don't think there would be anything to stop us suggesting that people shouldn't use their personal one for council business. So, I mean, I choose not to use Facebook for anything other than council stuff. And I know in other, well, I'm in education, so I know we can say to people, if you're representing the school, you do it through one channel. Which would then slightly back up the thing that you're saying, as if it's outrageous stuff being done on purpose, we can legally say that shouldn't be appearing on your council.
Yeah, I think we could certainly look at that. I think if we have the local power, legal power to set those sorts of expectations, we can certainly bring that to you in full council for decision and do so.
So at the very least, if you provide the facility, we can encourage. Whether it would be beyond that is a little bit more difficult, but certainly I think it's certainly gives something to take away on that sort of regret.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things you said, it's like a two-way stream on the social media policy.
Yeah.
That we're to advise it allowed to conduct us on social media, but you also want to put protections in place to protect us from harassment, so to speak. Because this is one of the things that has concerned me, especially in the last year or so, a very unpleasant trend to people who are on Twitter and something like they say something, and then they attract the ire of certain politically motivated people who just mob and make their lives miserable. So in the end, they have to leave their account. Is that the sort? Would we be looking at some sort of protections like that?
Yeah, I think my intention is to build resilience amongst members. The cases and issues that I've seen that come across my desk in the last few months, like you said, there are just people that drop into conversations that can be abusive, they can stir things, they can be aggressive.
Being part of a group as well.
Yeah. Now obviously, my power as monitoring only extends to members, advising members, helping members, and officers in the council. I'm not the police. I can't enforce things that happen outside of the remit of the council. But what I would hope to do in training and the protocols is actually give members toolkit and resilience to maybe navigate those sorts of things better, so that they themselves don't feel under threat or feel that they've lost control of the conversation. And I think there will be ways that members can be trained to manage those conversations, to reset conversations, so they don't spiral into aggressive tit for tat, those sorts of conversations.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that I think with the social media, obviously it's on Reggie's Act for a long time basically, and I know in the one of the recommendations it mentions about going straight to the full council.
Yeah.
But that would mean we wouldn't have seen the policy for it. So could it come to us first, or even if it's via email and we go back? So I know we're going to be, depending on when you're planning to get it given with the report to the full council, so that we've had a look at it first as the standards committee. And the other thing I think it's probably not helped is also, just from my personal view, is the last 3 months, but David was the third month. We have 2 months since David left, didn't we? Yeah. I didn't meet any of those two, and I don't know about other groups. I don't count by political groups, but I think that could be the fact that we would not. Some of us might not have actually been introduced to monitoring officer, so we didn't know who to go to, because we didn't. I mean, some of us weren't even aware when one left. And I think that's something we need to put right. We need to know what, and it's not just money officers, but officers of the council. Sometimes, as members, we don't know when officers are leaving or they've left, and I think that doesn't hold for good working relationships with officers and members. But I agree, we do need a social media policy, and I think we also need, maybe members need guidance on member-member relations as well, because I've noticed it has got sometimes things that I think people do need reminding of their responsibilities and maybe how to handle social media for those that aren't as confident or as comfortable as others.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I take all those points on board. I think, of course, we'll give you an update on all these aspects. I think that's a really valid point about meeting and monitoring officer, because I think that builds trust and that builds the ability for you to approach them and discuss issues that might be sensitive. I will take this opportunity that in June, as part of our member induction event, we will be having what we call a member directorate marketplace, whereby every member is invited to meet all the directorates. They can come into the office and set up stalls, and you're invited to meet them. So I would encourage members to come along to that. We're just organising events now, and you can meet every director and various key people in the offices. So I'll just finish with that.
Could I just comment on that? I was unable to attend the last one because it was during the work day.
Right.
Would it be possible to have it twice or something?
Maybe during the day and maybe in the evening for those that are working, that would make more sense for you, and give everyone an opportunity.
Well, I mean, it was a difficult year last year.
Are there any other questions from anybody? Okay, if we go to the recommendations on page 132, there are 3. The first one is the committee to the CLGA model council code of conduct as set out in appendix 1 and considers recommending to council that this is adopted.
Very good.
Second recommendation is that the committee consider asking the monitoring officer to develop a social media policy which should be adopted at the same time as the other mode of conduct.
Very
Yeah. And third one, monitoring officer to review the current process for handling member code of conduct complaints and the protocol for member officer relations and advise on any changes which should be made. Oh, there is one more because I've got that one, sorry. Note the contents and actions to be taken as set out in the exempt appendix 3. Okay, just remind everyone, please remember that as they're on things, they do need to be shredded, so if you haven't got that facility at home, give it back to Jenny and she will, okay, and she will dispose of them in the correct manner. Right, we're nearly done. It's the work programme next. I think, is that? Right, so, I know this is our last meeting this year, but we still need to just sort of plan the work programme a bit for beginning of next year, although it could be added to it as and when the new committee feels they need to. Jenny, do you want to go through anything on there?
Only that a lot of the items on the work programme are statutory items and they're automatically just carried over. So it will just be a case of adding additional reports, say like Matt's report in and anything else that the committee would like.
And how often does the committee feel that a report has been suggested from a management officer on what they do, or
Probably something we bring annually, perhaps.
I would
Yeah,
recommend
and
annually, and obviously if you want to follow up issues, we could bring those back to the agreement.
Okay. Is everyone happy with that?
It's all right, Chair. When we spoke the other day, we talked about putting an update on programme and project management on here, which was not about project specific. It was about learning from those projects that we previously reported on. So I think that's something you questioned. So just need to put that on.
Yeah. When do you think that should?
I was just actually looking at work plan for a different reason, really. I think if we are going to be able to bring, and so I'm not sure if Rachel's still on or can hear me, if we are going to be bringing the final accounts through and solving the amount of time up, I think, of a committee, and it could well be a new committee, and we don't know who's going to be on the committee for the next meeting and so on. So I think it might be worth working with yourself, Chair. I don't know if you're going to be the chair next time, obviously going to be the other chair, but yourself and or another new chair on that first item, on that first agenda, because there is, that is going to really be the key piece, I think, of anything, and need to make sure that we can give that due time and consideration.
So we could maybe, we might need another meeting put in, depending on
Possibly. So
is there a call? Sorry, I was going to say, I have to remember because I'll forget otherwise. Is there a need to, because if there was a new committee, we could have the accounts, could be one of the first things they discuss. So is there a need to pencil in some training before we meet, so that any new committees?
I think there is. As soon as we know the timing, we would normally start the first meeting of the committee of the municipal year with training on both the governance and standards, the standing side, but the governance for the accounts, etc. as well. Yeah, I think we need to very much look at the timing of that. And we've normally done that in the meeting, for the hour or so before the first meeting. I don't think that's going to be a reasonable amount of time. And if you remember, what we did this time was actually set up a training session just to brief on the accounts in draft versions, so that actually the final audit would make more sense, if you like, then from that as well. So we'll plan that out when we've got a better idea of timescales, Chair. Okay. But you're right, it will need something before that.
Just should we include in this when you're going to feedback with the suggested changes to the code of conduct? You actually have any idea when you can do that?
I've not got and I have to admit, it's my legal crew will be doing the nitty-gritty details of that. But, so yeah. So I think the first meeting I was looking at the draft. I think the first meeting stands in July, so we could look to aim to bring that any updates for that or prior to that.
Okay, yeah, no, that would be good. That is good.
Just working out Sean's reports first.
I think so, but sorry, Chair, I was also thinking about the timing of that before you just asked that question, because I looked down, it was the 8th of July, this year, and I'm just thinking we would be really keen to get that revised. I'm looking at my colleagues who've got to do the work across the tables now. But we would be really, really keen to get that to the first proper council of the year, I think, and that's not the AGM, so we're probably looking at July council. And if we could get it through July council, it means having to come to this first standards and audit committee, I think, and that sort of works as we think about the process, but we'll pick that up outside.
Anything else? Thank you for your time, Councillors and Board members this year, and hopefully look forward to seeing you next year. And with you guys as well. Hopefully you'll be, or good luck if you're at the re-election. And
None of
thanks,
us
officers, for your.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
I don't know,
Chair.
I've just forgotten who that.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Good night. Good night.
Thanks a lot.